Hey everybody, thanks for tuning back into OTRAM's YouTube channel, your source for Land Cruiser repairs and modifications. Today we're doing the final video on our 4.7 timing belt install. Video 1, we tore everything down. Video 2, we did the cam and crank seals. So now it's time to put everything back together. And I'll link the first two videos up in the info bar, and then if you go down in the description below, I'll have a link to our website where we've got all the parts and tools we use for this job listed. So let me reframe you in a little bit better for the motor. And we can go ahead and get started. And with the last video, after I did the oil seals, I totally forgot to put the cam wheels back in at the end of the video. So you just want to make sure that they're clean on the back surface, that the front surface of the cam is clean. And we can stick them on, and you just got to line them up with that little line-up pin. And then we can stick our bolt in. And these are side specific. The passenger side one doesn't have a front lip. Same thing over here on the driver's side. And those get torqued up to 80 foot-pounds. So we're going to take our pin wrench oh, and I hate it when it does that. My torque wrench reset on me. There we go. There we go. Those are set. Now we can take our crank pulley and make sure it's nice and clean. And we're going to slide that on there. Make sure that the little keyway is still in here. We'll slide that guy on. We can put our idler pulleys on. So I'll grab my old idler pulley that I left the bolt in, transfer the bolt over to the new idler, and that one goes in here. Soon as I find my 14 socket, there we go. And there's you can see you can rock this up and down, but if you pull it out, it stops rocking. There's a step on that bolt. You need to make sure that the step is centered in the pulley as you bolt this down, otherwise it won't tighten up straight. So just put that in there loosely for a second. And we can get out our new tensioner pulley. And we're going to take the step bolt out of the old pulley, making sure that we put this big fat washer on the back. And we can start this in here. And these get torqued to 25 foot-pounds. We'll tighten that guy. And then the 10 millimeter hex socket. Tighten that guy. And I just totally did that out of order. I wasn't paying attention and should have put the water pump in first. Okay, so don't do like me and completely forget that you haven't put the water pump in yet. We'll just spin this guy back off. It was practice, so we know how to put these on there real well. Okay, so back to our water pump. I've already gone through and scraped this with a scraper and then taken a little bit of like a green scuff pad and just made sure all the old residue is off of here. Go around with your finger, make sure there's nothing that you can feel on there. And then we can take the water pump gasket and fish it back on here. And there's an alignment dowel here that you want to make sure it seats back on. And then we need to put the O-ring on this coolant pipe. And I like to take just a little bit of silicone grease and put it on this O-ring before I put it on. It makes it much easier to get the water pump to seat if you lube that O-ring first. Then we can take our new water pump, hold this wiring harness out of the way, and feed that on there and wiggle it over that O-ring. And then you just want to look at this top edge to make sure that it's actually seated back. We'll put our one nut down here. We'll stick all our studs back in there. And then these guys and this guy go to 12 foot-pounds. I'm going to switch over to a longer, or a deep socket. Like that. And then the rest of these are 15. And I like to hit them all twice just to double check that I've gotten them all. Now we can put this tensioner back on, or this idler pulley back on. Make sure it spins freely. Retorque it again. There we go. And then we want to put the very important mouse keeper outer cover plate in here before we forget. And this wire kind of tucks back into this groove between these two bolt holes. Okay, so now that that's back on, we can start putting our belt on. And you'll see, come on, focus. There we go. It says, crank front. So that lines up with the little dot here on the front of the crank pulley. And just to make doubly sure, so that's your dot on the crank pulley. And then, make sure I'm reading this in the right order. There's your keyway and your bolt holes. That way you've got extra assurance that you're lined up properly. And then further along, come on, focus. Well, it's labeled left cam and then right cam. So you can be sure that you've got that on there right. So I'm going to just loosely drape this up through here and kind of over there, just so it's out of my way. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to line my line that's labeled crank. I'm going to line that up with the little divot in the end here. And then you can see I line up to the bolt hole and I line up to the centering pin, or the keyway rather. And this is a lot of fun to keep this from snaking around. When you shove this all the way back, there's two little ridges that come up off the oil pump that hold it from being able to come out of time there. And then you wrap it up, take up your slack, and you're going to come up around your left cam. And sitting right here, my cam timing mark's here, but my belt mark's up here because this is spun a little bit while everything was loose. So we're going to take our fancy wrench here and we're going to use that to spin this around until we line up. And we're going to keep a finger on that. We're going to snake it under the water pump. This one's really fighting me today. I think it's because I'm on camera. There we go. Sometimes you can eke these up and get them to sit back locked again. And then on this side, I need my cam to go the other way. And there we go. Take up a little bit of slack there. And then we'll double check. I know you can't really see it, but my right hand cam mark is lined up with my cam mark there, my left one here to there, and then I'm still good down here. So before all of this flies apart, we can go ahead and put our new hydraulic tensioner in. We'll grab our bolts out of our old tensioner. And on these two, it's the opposite of when we took them out. You want to step back and forth between them to keep this going up evenly. We're going to just snug that. We're going to tighten those up to 19. There we go. And we're going to give it one last look to make sure that our marks are good there, marks good there, and marks good there. Actually, I'm going to take you off the tripod for a minute. So there you can see the timing marks on the crank. Our one that's labeled crank lines up to the divot, the bolt, and then the keyway. And then up here on the right cam, we're lined up with that mark. We're not so concerned about these marks yet. And then the same thing, you can see our left cam. So once we've double checked that, we can pull the pin out of the tensioner and put tension on the belt. Then we're going to put our timing wheel in, and it's got to line up with the keyway, and it's also got to come so that the dish is pointing out. If you put this on backwards, it'll chew into the timing belt. And then we can put our lower cover on. And there's just 4 10mm headed bolts that go in here. Snug those up. And we can put the damper pulley on, again, making sure that it's clean, and line it up with the keyway. You just kind of wiggle it on there. And we'll put our bolt in. And now we can double check that our timing's all good. So we're going to go 2 revolutions around on the crank. There's 1. We're coming up on 2. And there we go. We got our timing mark here to 0. And you can see that our cam mark lines up with the timing mark here, and same thing over here. So we know we're good to go in time. I'm actually going to bring you closer. I don't know if you guys can see that, but there's the timing mark there, lined up with 0. This timing mark lines up with this timing mark. And then this one with that one. So we know we're good to go and we're in time. I'm not going to torque this right now. I'm going to wait until it's back in the truck and it's easier to hold, because it would be terrible to try to torque right now. And that gets torqued, this one gets torqued up to 181 foot-pounds. So you would just use the crank holding tool like we used when we took it off to counter hold that and torque this back. I don't have a good way to counter it right now with it out of the truck, so we're going to leave that be. Okay, so now that we've verified that everything's in time, we can start putting the rest of the truck back together. We're going to start with our serpentine belt tensioner. And we're going to wiggle that on there. We're going to put our one long 12 millimeter bolt down here in the bottom, and then two nuts up here at the top. And there's two styles of 12 millimeter nuts. If you jumbled all your stuff together, there's a set without serrations, and those go on these brackets, and the other one's over here. Come on. And then there's a set that's serrated, and these are for the fan clutch. So just make sure you get those in the right places. We're going to torque these to 12. There we go. And now that that's on, we can slip our alternator back on, and you'll normally have the wiring and everything still attached to the alternator because it'll still be in the truck. We've got it loose because we had it out of the truck. And that's a 14 bolt and a 14 nut. Snug those up. We're good there. And then we can snag our power steering pump, which again, normally this would just be dangling off to the side. But because we've got the whole engine out, it's sitting here. And that's these 14-headed bolts that you fish in through the front of the pulley. Come on. And these get torqued to 13. And now we can come over to the other side of the motor and put our fan bracket on. And before you start putting this in, make sure that your wiring's tucked back in its grooves. And then you can fish that onto the studs like so. There we go. And sometimes it just wants to be a real pain to snake back in there. You got a long 14-headed bolt that goes down here, and then a 14 nut over here. And then a long 12 bolt and a 12 nut here. And those are 12 and 24 foot-pounds. 12 on the 12-headed one, and I just lost my socket. We'll use this one. If we put it on there right. And we'll bump that up to 24. Like so. And then we can take this bracket and loop it back and tuck our wiring back and snap our AC compressor wire back on. Then we can get our two frame bolt, or not frame bolts, AC compressor bolts that go in from the frame side. We can stick these up in here. And those are going to torque to 36. There we go. So we've got those all torqued in. We can come over here and grab our cam position sensor. Make sure it's wiped off and clean. And fish it in here. Snug that guy up. I hate how tight it is on this side to try to spin this guy back in. I did not grab a 10 millimeter deep when I started. There we go, that guy's snugged up. So it's just these two bolts here for the cam sensor. Now we can grab the belt cover for this side. And we're going to carefully fish this cam sensor wire up through the hole in the front. At the same time, we feed the cover in. And then we're going to hook it over that stud. Snap those two together. And then the wire hooks in this little clip right here. And then we can take our grommet, slip it over the wire, and I like to point the slot facing up and press that back into the cover. We can put our 4 10 millimeter headed cover bolts on. Like so. Snug those all down. Make sure we got all 4 of them. There we go. I'll stick that guy off to the side. And now we can come to this cover. And it just slips in here. Like so. And as you're putting this one on, there's a little nipple that sticks into this back timing cover to line it up. And then we'll torque these guys to 12. There we go. We can stick this timing cover on. And this side, there's 3 bolts and 1 nut. And snug all those up. And we're getting close. And now that we've got all of our covers and everything back on and buttoned up, we can move on to the water outlet. And first thing I'm going to do is peel this old O-ring out. and set it off to the side. And then we've got a bunch of old sealer in here where the old one was glued on, so we need to clean that out. So you can just take a small screwdriver and work that out of there. Screwdriver seems to work well for this because you can actually get down in the corners and creases. And I just take a razor blade and flat scrape the surface to get the big surface stuff off. And I didn't bring my wire brush over, but then I'll take a wire brush and just go over it again. So once you've got all the old sealer residue off of there, go ahead and degrease it. And I'm going to degrease the top of the water pump outlet too. And now we can run a bead of sealer on here. Depending on what year your truck is, there's technically two different sealers. The early trucks use the older FIPG gasket maker. The newer trucks that take the pink coolant take a really expensive gasket maker that's in like a green tube. So make sure you're using the proper sealer. And I did that slightly out of order. Not that it really matters, but before you put the sealer on, put your new O-ring on. So put my new O-ring on here. I'm going to put a little grease on that just to lubricate it, make it easier to put in. And the silicone grease that we're using here in the shop is rubber safe, so it won't deteriorate the seals. And you also want to make sure that you've cleaned the bore out here where that O-ring goes in real well. And then I find it helps to stick the bolts in here and kind of get them started lightly. And that'll help you guide that O-ring down in without smearing your sealer everywhere. And then we'll just torque these guys down to 15. And we can put our water outlet pipe back in here. If I can remember which way it goes around. And just switch its hooks on the cooler there. Kind of tucks behind this wiring harness. And then onto the water outlet there. And then it goes over the stud coming through the timing cover with this little 10mm acorn nut. And stick that hose on there too. And then there's a little bolt down here that goes into the fan bracket. And we'll snug those. Let me go grab a pair of pliers and I'll put all my clamps on. And when you're sticking the clamps back on, if you're not putting new hoses on, try to get them to line up with the old marks where the old clamps were. And it'll give you a better chance of sealing properly. There we go. I got all those on. We can put this idler pulley back on. And this guy goes to 27 foot-pounds. And for some reason, that guy won't torque up. So we're going to go back and look at that one in a little bit. We can keep moving on, because it doesn't matter to you guys that that one won't torque up right. We're going to get out our new thermostat, and we're going to put our seal on there. And there's just a groove in the inside of the seal that works around that, that metal lip. And then you can see there's a little jiggly valve here. That points to the top. And the fun part is sticking this cover on while holding the valve in so it doesn't fall down. And once you've got a nut on there to hold it, you're good to go. And we're going to tighten these up to 12. If I can find my socket that I keep setting aside. There we go. And then finally, you would put your fan pulley, your fan, and then these 4 serrated nuts on. Put your fan on and put your belt on. I'm not going to do that right now because I'm going to wait until after we put this back into the engine to put the fan on because that's going to make it a lot easier. But anyway, that is reassembly of a 4.7 liter Toyota timing belt. Hopefully you found that useful. If you did, please subscribe. If you found it super useful, check out our Patreon link down in the description below. And again, if you're looking for the parts or tools we used, down in the description I'll have a link to our website that links out all the parts and tools we used in this video. Hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in.